good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and thank you for dialing in. And it's a privilege to have your time today and speak on this topic, which is decoding FinOps. Uh, there are so many questions that being asked around FinOps because this is a pretty new concept for a lot of geographies and a lot of businesses around the world. And we thought we'll bust some myths around FinOps and have some fun time interacting with you today. I have with me Hitesh, who has been a techno-commercial expert in the cloud and enterprise transformation space. He has worked with all the leaders uh, in the cloud space, rack space, Avanade, Software One, of course, Cloud4C, ourselves, and he's on the advisory council of Harvard Business Review, Forbes Technology Council, and he's a certified expert in cybersecurity in cloud space and otherwise as well. And moreover, he's a FinOps practitioner too, and a strong ambassador for the value that FinOps actually delivers to organizations. He's been working with a lot of large enterprises as well as SMEs as well as startups, different kinds of, enterprises on or organizations on high growth path in Southeast Asia, India. Now he's helping out the organizations in Middle East and US as well. Welcome to the session, Hitesh. I'm sure embracing cloud was not an easy decision for you to make in your organizations, and now more so you've embraced it. What is it that as a business impact it is generating? What is the value that you're deriving out of your cloud investments and otherwise? But it can be a security investment around cloud, or it can be a modernization investment. Do you want to make it? Do you want to think of making it? I'm sure you will be faced with a lot of questions. All of you might be working, you yourself might be a CXO, a CEO, or a CIO, or a CFO, or a CISO, or you're working very closely with them. If you're here in this session, I'm sure you're somebody who's a champion of deriving the maximum business value on the investments that we are making, especially in bolstering the technology landscapes to foster the business impact or to foster the future plans of your organization. So, as kids, I'm sure Hitesh, I come from a household which is from a middle class, in what India calls. So I see my dad and mom actually bucketing a lot of expenses into different categories so that way they know what to cut and what to add whenever they had to do. So I'm sure I don't know, most of you, if you resonate with it, that's how our childhood has been, that they always bucket the expenses. They know exactly where each one of the rupees going and what is the value or what is the priority of their investments that they're doing. So I was thinking, if you draw a parallel to organizations today, my CEO friends, my CISO friends, my CDO friends, they have a couple of questions on their mind, and not everybody is able to answer them instantly. For example, a CEO always has this question: are we pricing the product features for the strong margins? Are we pricing it right? What feature I have to include? What feature I have to exclude? Which segment I have to concentrate more? Which segment I should probably not be spending a lot? Same with a CISO, where they're putting a lot of investments on multi-cloud security and incident management. But is it autonomous? Is it achieving the continuous compliance? And thanks to the poll, most of you are also experiencing that security and compliance are on your mind all the time. If I'm asking a CFO, like if I double the customers tomorrow or hit the sales plan next quarter, how much would it cost? Will it cost more for me to service a customer or less for me? Where am I getting the actual economies of scale? So these are the questions that I face. Hitesh, what has been your experience? I would like to know. You talk to mostly CIOs, CISOs, and CEOs almost every day. So how has it been?
Thank you, Madhvi. Firstly, thank you for the introduction. That was very humbling. I think I would call myself just a practitioner of these domains that affects our digital transformation and how we empower the businesses across the globe of adopting technologies like cloud to drive the business transformation, right? Now, to answer what you just asked, I would actually go back to the data that we've just gathered from the audience, right? The challenges that majority of the audience out here with the cloud sees is around security and compliance. Yeah. Let me put it this way, that if we were to ask, what is the major challenge with the achieving the right set of compliance and security assurance on the cloud? What would be the major factor that is limiting here or is challenge? I know there would be things like skills, availability of the skills and all, but it all boils down probably not having what can be justified as a right budget allocated for the compliance and security. Madhvi, would you agree that if the businesses or the decision makers had flexibility of having more budget, would they have some better controls implemented around to addressing the security concern? The answer would be most likely yes, right? Who would not want to put an additional layer of be it the people expertise or the processes or the technologies to enhance their assurance on the security? Now, how does it relate back to the topic that we have today about the FinOps, right? Now, how does FinOps helps into certain of these challenges? Well, when I used to speak about, I think 4 years back, that getting a FinOps in place as a practice would help you to secure your workload in the cloud. I used to get this question actually, how they are two related. And the relation is obviously controlling your waste, right? I mean, managing your cloud waste and reinvesting that for the priorities that you have, be it the innovation that you want to drive with your cloud modernization, or if it is a better security that you're looking, can you invest into some next generation technologies by freeing up the existing residual waste and the budget that you've already been spending on your cloud? So FinOps is definitely going to help you with the one of the challenges that we just discovered on the call. Now, before assuming that everybody on the panel, on the webinar today understand what FinOps is, I would actually go back to the foundation and take a look at, what does it mean when we say FinOps, right? Now, as I understand a lot of executives that have dialed in are well aware of it, but for bringing everybody to a common understanding, FinOps is essentially a practice of bringing financial accountability and a cultural change to the variable spend of the cloud. Now, what does it mean? Those organizations who are adopting cloud, or those practitioners who have just transformed from their skill set around the on-premises world to the cloud, they would find it very different that one of the predictable thing in the on-premise world was more on the procurement processes. It was well documented of how you would actually go and acquire some resources, how would you take necessary approvals, and how the cost governance will be there. Now, it's a separate fact that there used to be an over allocation of the capacities, and some of the practices in the on-premise world are completely misaligned of how cloud functions, right? But when a company or an organization is going big with their cloud initiatives, a foundation process or fundamental process that they're very accustomed to is procurement that immediately start functioning in a different way. And in a cloud world, a developer can provision hundreds of systems with a line of code executed, which means your budget can go on a very different tangent by just an ability of a technical team member to be able to spin up. Now, and that is probably is unbudgeted amount that we're talking about. Now, how do you bring all the stakeholders, the cloud consumers, the testers, the developers, the executives, the procurement teams, and the finance team under one vocabulary, one framework where they all understand their roles and responsibilities, their need of our to understand how various ecosystem of the FinOps in the cloud works and how their personas can add value to this, right? So this is, it's very important for a takeaway for the webinar today is that FinOps is a practice where a distributed accountability is required, but a centralized champions are required. So, and I will elaborate it further. What does it mean? It means that your organization has to have a center of excellence or a FinOps team who would be centrally working out on the best practices to be laid down, the policies, the architecture patterns, the approved way of committing the discounts, etc. But you would have accountability across everybody who's doing some sort of provisioning, architectures, security, and anybody who's actually causing your spend to go high or low, right? Has to have some accountability on this. So the distributed and the cross-functional team has to come together to make FinOps effective. I'll take a pause here.
So, so Hitesh, uh,
Yeah.
are you saying that, you know, cloud will make everything cheap is a myth? Because if not handled, cloud can be expensive.
Interesting, Madhvi. It can be a long debate, but I'll actually put it this way. I don't think businesses are going just for being cheaper as an alternative to the cloud, right? That's not the driving factor. If you look at all these studies, right, they are transforming how they do the business, how they serve their customers, how a business scaling from 1 million transactions today to a 10 million transactions, in a coming quarter, they go for cloud digital transformations for achieving the agility that they're looking for. There are many other customers who we interact with. They're modernizing not just workload but also the securities and all. So there are plenty of different business values that the cloud delivers, and obviously the digital transformations are undertaken to achieve those KPIs. Well, better ROI and a better TCO is always something that business strive for. And I'm not saying that cost optimization is not in the center of FinOps. It is, right? But cheap may not be the best way to define. And I'll give an example. An organization spending 10,000 a month today on the cloud versus they spending 20,000 next month. Can it be a bad thing or a good thing? Well, in a many aspect, it might be an indicator of success if you have a effective cloud governance, cost governance, which means your costs, which increase from 10 to 20, are well rationalized. And then there is every dollar is returning you appropriate business value out of it, right? So in that case, even increasing the spend is a good spend. Whereas if I go back to a massive study that Gartner has conducted, that the cloud spend for 2023 will be hitting nearly to 600 billion in 2023. And we're talking 600 billion. And I understand a lot of that spend will be coming from the SaaS, which is not a typical FinOps area where you optimize, just like the IaaS, PaaS, and the other services, right? But if you look at the second top spend area is infrastructure as service, even today. While we think about a lot of the PaaS services taking over and the other modernization initiative, IaaS remains and will keep growing as one of the top categories where businesses spend their cloud dollars, right? So we're looking at 600 billion of spend in 2023. We're looking IaaS as the second biggest category under where the customers are spending. Now, the third data point that will capture your mind, and I would recommend everybody to read that report, is on average, 35% of the cloud spend goes on as a waste. So
My
we're
God.
looking for a multi-billion-dollar data point, and out of that, average is 35%. Now, what is the best case? What if we had a fully functional FinOps model? Even in that case, we're looking at 15% of the waste, but which is acceptable given the value that you try, right? And if you look at the customers who have almost no governance or not adequate governance, in that case, they are spending somewhere around 55% on the waste. Now, these are the big data points, and that I think that proves the point.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's all about how much do you derive. So FinOps is much beyond the way you're explaining it, much beyond the cost optimization. Cost optimization probably is a result of a lot of things that we do. But how much value to derive, how many customers you're onboarding more, how much of breadth you're able to expand, and the agility that you get to do business is all about how you're having a fantastic financial governance model using FinOps as the core philosophy. That's that's
Absolutely.
that's super. That's super. I am all kicked.
Madhvi, I think what I would like to also mention is that just like security, there's no absolute security. It has an ongoing it has to be an ongoing practice to ensure your posture remains the way you want to maintain, right? Similarly, in cost governance, what FinOps emphasize a lot is building um, rapid decision making by building the visibility and kind of instantaneous world where the cloud lives in, right? Which means the reporting and the visibilities cannot wait for 30 days. And is an important aspect of, if you say that you are adopting FinOps, you have to figure it out by using the tools, processes that the decision makers have, the data point, the personas that are involved into that, as a rapid mechanism, right? So if you look at the CEOs, CIOs, and all, they will not be able to make the adequate decision in terms of their cloud spend if it is a reactive. And we are talking about, even if the 2 weekly report goes to them of where we are spending, it might already be late in terms of their calling out some sort of mitigations to control the cost. So it is super important to build a visibility. And as we dive a little deeper in terms of what FinOps framework is, you will see building the visibility is one of the foundation where you have to have adequate processes that your cost can be either charged back or show back, or mechanism, be tag hygiene, etc., are implemented in an automated way so that you have instantaneous data available, at least for decision making. Now, why it is complex? Madhvi, though you mentioned that this is a kind of a relatively new term, well, practitioners have been diving into this for quite a number of years in the past. Yeah. But as like DevOps, right? There are still organizations who are still new to the DevOps, and they're using traditional way of delivering their services. Similarly, FinOps, in terms of the adoption, it has been adopted in a bits and pieces, but as a framework, widely acceptance is still evolving. And that's where even the FinOps organization actually calls in the definition, it's an evolving practice. That means you will see different disciplines coming up, different learnings coming up from the masses adoption, and obviously the tool chain and all that is maturing. So it's an evolving discipline, but still not a new discipline as such, right? So since the cloud has become a big thing, people are being impacted with the ROIs not being matching to what was done in the early planning stage, right? The cost and the budgets are exceeding way higher than it was. Now, what makes this a complex process, right? Now, those who are practicing cloud day in, day out would be able to resonate, but for the other decision makers or the stakeholders who are the key to make decision whether the cloud is the right fit and how to evolve their digital transformation journey alongside of the cloud adoption, it is important to share the complexity comes from various parameters. On the screen we can see what is the paradox here, right? So if you look at some data point, what are the top challenges of controlling the cloud costs? Number one is visibility, as it is highlighted here. You cannot control what you cannot see out there. And it is very surprising that many of the organizations still does not fully understand the bill. The cloud bills are a bit complex. And even if you understand the dollar values out there, it is very difficult to categorize. If you've not proactively planned, your spend, it is difficult to categorize certain expenditures which are big enough in the bill that which is the business unit, application, department, or the function has to be paying for that, right? It is unlike the traditional procurement where you have a pre-authorization and before a PO is issued, everything is approved from a business case and the business unit. In cloud, the spends are on the fly. People are spending by creating the resources. And as a reactive bill, it becomes very difficult of how do you have a visibility of that. And not just that, but the unpredictability of the cloud spend, right? So it is so dynamic that your bills from last month to this month can be double or triple or more than that based on just certain resources that has been provisioned or some new business initiatives that has been taken, right? So how does the finance team do the right forecasting? And forecasting becomes a big challenge in that case. You can't say no to many of those projects because they are essentially delivering you some sort of values, where you're working on a customer acquisition journey. You are processing a million more transactions tomorrow on the business, right? You do not want to say no as a business or an IT, but your forecast of what would be your cloud budget obviously goes for it also. So that's where it is important that you bring all the personas together, be it finance, developers, and all, and define the right KPIs. So this framework is beyond cost optimization, right? Cloud cost optimization has been there as a practice for quite a while, but what FinOps does, it expands it. So cost optimization is a subset of
On that note, I know this is a research. I want to understand quickly from the audience, what is their number one issue or when they're managing costs? Bhavya, can you do a quick poll on this one? Oh, 53 executives say cost management is the number one challenge on cloud. How do you rate yours? That is huge. Almost 92% feels that it deserves a lot of attention and it is stressful. It's a little
and it's
alarming.
not a surprise, and they're not alone actually. I think the only relief I can give an assurance is that you're not the only one who is struggling with that, because of the complexity involved. And it requires top-down support to be implementing, a cultural shift, as you know, because a lot of personas has to come together and form the best practices group, as well as the accountabilities has to be assigned. Let me give you a practical example. How many of developers out there thinks that the cost control is their responsibility in a traditional setup? Well, the numbers would be very, very depressing out there, right? Not many of their development teams have the KPIs around the cost control. They do have KPIs to deliver the innovations, deliver the project on time. So what you expect is they will continue with the normal practices of going safer in terms of your resource allocation, resource provisioning. Very often I meet the CXOs where the dev test cost is way higher than they anticipated, and particularly in the cloud. Well, if you have ability to provision all possible technologies at the fraction of second, the developers will tend to provision that, right? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as it is rationalized and justified with the business value that it will drive, right? So FinOps emphasizes that spending a dollar is not bad, but spending a dollar with the right level of justifications and accountability is important. Now, 30% of the organizations, and this is actually aligned to the practicals, and in fact, the practicing, I've seen it more, maybe 50% of the organizations suffers, not just because they do not know how to implement FinOps. The body of knowledge is well known now. It is getting the engineers to take cost optimization actions. And rightfully so. If you look at this, first, their KPIs are not designed for cost optimization. But even if you bring that changes, the business operations, the IT operations team, the focus has always been keeping the lights up, right? So they are conditioned to keep the application performance in the lights up, not making decisions which might, at least on the high level, cause some disruption to the services. So that's where sometimes the fears, sometimes holding it back in terms of quality of inputs, about the optimizations. Now, there are a lot of tools available out there, but the quality of insights on where you can take actions might not be consistent, right? Because effectively, a tool is using a lot of parameters to drive the data. Now, how old the data is, how long the analysis has been done, what are the predictability models that the tooling are working on. There's a lot of black box associated to that, and the developer community would know a black box means the rules which are this deriving the output or the decision, suggesting the decisions are not well known. So in that case, a lot of engineers won't act on, though they know that if they would act on, there's a potential of cost savings out there. So it remains a challenge. Now, how do you mitigate it? There are various ways. Obviously, by some of the mitigation can be by using a service provider to be accountable to run those initiatives or the cost optimization. Just like Cloud4C, we have been helping customers on this aspect, where we bring in the multi-COE expertise as a task force to run those mitigations in terms of the rationalizing cost and implementing the corrective measures. The second, on this heat map, you can see accurate forecasting of the spend. Now, if you don't build your provisioning and deprovisioning mechanism by bringing a robust tagging framework, it is going to be difficult. Now, tagging, though may it sound very easier to implement and simpler, it is impractical. It's a very um, it's a very deliberate effort to make sure that every resource, be it a shared resource, just like a networking, a VPCs, a VNet, and the associated network interface cards, the disks in the backup systems, and the tiering of the storage. There are plenty of resources which are beyond the scope of your commit user discount or the RIs, right? And they are many times a major spend of your cloud bill. So it is very important of how would you put a proper forecasting out there by putting the tagging, being able to run a model which actually gives you at least some forecasting, which is at least accurate, right? So, and this excluding any unforeseen project that you get into that. That is more about change management of how would you introduce a new project within your current cloud ecosystem without affecting your budget. There has to be a change management process that your budget will have to be revised for any additional approval of the resources. But for the current spend, you have to have some accurate spend forecasting. And as usual, this is a challenge for many of the organization. Madhu, just a sound check. Is my audio good enough?
Yes, it is good enough. Yeah. So,
Uh,
can you show a visualization? How complex is this?
Okay, perfect. Here we
Oh,
go.
fantastic.
So this
Okay.
is this is just one aspect of how a bandwidth estimation or a data transfer charges can be variable in terms of the spend. Now, as you can see, north south, east west, how chatty your applications are, how the architecture has been done. For example, do you have component that sits within the ecosystem of your hosting, or there are component that has to be exchanging data between your on-premises or a multi-cloud universe, right? So and not just this, if you look at this, the complexity also comes from the number of choices that the architects have. So as a cloud architect, you would have hundreds and hundreds of hues. There are thousands, but I would say, given that your application, you still would end up with at least 100 of different choices in terms of what type of instance that you're using or a VM that you're using, what type of the sizing you will give it. There are hundreds of plenties of configurations in terms of the memory, CPU, and all. um, where would your database will be sitting? Is it a PaaS or IaaS? And then how much chatty they will be. And in terms of the storage alone, what type of tiering you would use, what type of backup policies you would use, the disaster recovery configurations. So there are plenty of choices, which is a great thing as an architect, right? You have ability to tailor fit your solutions, but which also means that there are more than one ways of doing that. In fact, there are more than 10 ways of doing the same application architectures out there by using different technologies, right? So your complexity of the choices increases the complexity of your cloud spend will end up. So you can actually achieve the same application availability and your run these same operations for, let's say, 100,000 a month. By the same time, if you put a deliberate effort of re-architecting or modernizing some sort of element, you might achieve the same thing with the 70K spend as well. So, and can you reinvest the 30,000, because it's an effort that you've invested into this? Can you reinvest the 30,000 to get a better security solution out there? And that's where I pointed back that if you eliminate your waste, you can actually reinvest for the higher business values. I know I
This
digressed,
this
but the
this is
complexity
this
is,
looks like this looks like a maze. It doesn't look like a technology problem to solve. It looks like a data problem to solve to me.
yes, it is in partly cultural data, and that's where building the visibility, right? Where you're spending, how you're spending, and getting the concept of augmented FinOps, right? Because humanly, you could do it with a certain manual tools to an extent, and that extent might not benefit at all with the FinOps. And we can talk about that. It's a debate to do. But the scale, when you are actually going big on terms of the spend, now big is a relatively different word, because I think 50 of the so at least sizable number of the Fortune 50 companies are now practicing FinOps, right? For them, the big means multi-million a month. But for any other business size as well, some 100Ks per month is also a sizable spend as compared to their variable spend. So it is important that not to be overwhelmed with this data, right? And that's where certain tools makes it a little easier to consume the decisions that you want to drive on the optimization. Right? You don't want to be doing a lot of manual exercise and compiling the data, because it is important to understand a lot of this data is instantaneous, which means if you don't have figured out that, within a matter of days that you need to act on this, you will actually end up spending by the end of the month a lot already. So ability to use some tooling is ultra crucial, Madhvi, if I put it this way.
So can you throw a little more light on what is happening with the current FinOps? What's the framework? What are the implementations like? What's wrong? What can be better? I would like to know more.
Thing. So let me actually come to this again. This is a simplification of what is a framework. And let me spend next 5 minutes on explaining this, right? So FinOps Foundation has put up some principle, just like DevOps started with certain principle that has to be achieved. Similarly, FinOps, there has to have some FinOps principle being followed by the organization who's attempting to adopt FinOps. Starting with, teams need to collaborate. Now, this is as basic as it sounds, but ultra crucial, right? If the developers and the finance team are not coordinating and collaborating on a single provisioning exercise, then we are talking about the silos, which will lead to obviously waste, right? For example, can your developer go and negotiate the best possible pricing of the contract with the cloud provider? Less likely. Can your procurement do that? Absolutely. But will the procurement be able to put the right sizing informations, the technical information, the architecture information alone? Not really. They would actually not know what the cloud application is and what function it is going to use, right? So the multiple personas in the team has to collaborate, and that's the principle. Everyone take accountability or ownership of their cloud use. This is very important principle, because if they don't, then in a traditional world where you put everybody under procurement, as a procurement decision making, cloud doesn't function that way. Every cloud consumer within your organization who has ability to provision and disrupt or change the resources has ability to spend from your budget, which means there has to be accountability across all the layers of cloud practitioners that you have. And again, the business units as well, because they are asking for certain applications and changes and the features that they think the business value would be derived from. So it's important to be used, and the business unit heads also take the accountability of that. A centralized team drives FinOps. Now, it is very important to understand correctly the statement, because a centralized team cannot make FinOps successful. And I'm categorically taking a pause, which means that if you have a central champions who understand how FinOps works, but the entire organization does not follow that culture, the developers and the cloud engineers, cloud architects are not abiding to their accountability, their stake of responsibility, then FinOps is not going to be a successful initiative. But there is a central team has to be developed who is actually setting up the best practices, but they collaborate and they drive that initiatives along with other accountable parties, where you actually involve cross-functional teams. The other principle is decisions are driven by business value of cloud. And as I emphasized earlier, FinOps does not necessarily say that you reduce your dollar spend. It's about rationalizing, about putting a business value of that. And a term that they've coined very well is unit economics, right? So if you're a shipping company and spending, let's say, a couple of millions, but are able to process 10 million packages, right? Can you spend the same amount, not raising your cloud budget, but support your business growth with at least 20% more shipments? That's where you try to measure your cloud spend with the economy of your business, which means a unit economics. The other principle is take advantage of the variable cost model. Variable cost model in many of cases becomes a challenge where you actually don't know what is going to be the next bill. But there's a lot of advantage that it brings from the capex to opex model, right? If you take the right procurement planning in place, you can benefit for that. For example, if I talk about the cloud waste, which is happening, we discussed about the data, plenty of sizable amount of revenue leakage happening from the companies putting in the waste of the cloud. If you look at the variable cost model, it provides you a lot of tooling. For example, an application, it has to be running periodically. There are technical abilities to execute the code during that certain time and not spend anything beyond that time other than some storage account, right? But if you actually architect it in a traditional way where you're putting the VMs or the EC2s to run that, definitely you're not taking the variable model to your advantage, right? Similarly, being able to commit for a predictable workload. Now, it will be unfair to say that all the workloads are dynamic in nature because there are traditional applications in the workload which have predictability. And if you use the commit user discount, the savings plan, the RIs effectively, then you can take advantage of that. That's where this principle is about taking the advantage of the variable cost model. Coming to
So
the personas. Yeah, please go ahead, Madhvi.
yeah, this framework seems very good. So what is it that you know that can be better? Why do you think all FinOps implementations are not achieving their full potential?
Um, Well, there are companies which are making it pretty good, in terms of the
Hmm.
particularly the cloud native, startups and all, because this is important for their survival and the profitability to do it right. But it is a very common challenge for the enterprises who are doing the migrations to the cloud, because as we discussed, it's a cultural change and a diversified set of personas. And as you can see on the framework, you would have FinOps practitioner who's more of setting up the best practices. Then you have executives buying to invest in the right tooling processes, governance around the FinOps. Then you have product owners, the procurement, engineering, and operations all coming together to make it successful. If any of those personas don't see a value or don't feel accountable for that, you would have a not so efficient FinOps in place, right? And understanding that challenges, even the FinOps Foundation has laid down that you need to focus on crawl, walk, and run methodology, which means you first build the foundation. And if you look at the phases, is building the visibility and allocation is the first priority that you need to get it right, which means you should be able to inform at least, of what are your spend, where are you spending, how are you spending, etc. The next phase is undertaking the optimization, right? You doing the right sizing, committing for a committed users discounts, and doing the actions, taking some actions to optimize the spend. And if you have inform and optimize in place, then you operationalize that overall, which means an iterative cycle. And as we say, it's not an absolute state where you can say today your FinOps operated, because if you actually not practice that in iteratively, then you will actually end up to the same location where you were.
Sounds interesting. But this is a resource. The way you're saying it, I mean, it is a resource intensive, and a lot of data crunching has to be done. And that is why you were mentioning about functionality to FinOps, augmented FinOps, if I can put it that way. Can you throw some light on that?
Abid, you mentioned about if I heard you correctly, there was a break. You're talking about the augmented FinOps.
Hmm.
Did I heard it correct? So
Yes, correct.
basically, as you know, there's a lot of data point that has to be processed, and not just processed, there has to be processed timely to build a visibility that will allow decision makers to take, proactive actions or rapid actions. Now, why it is important is because just like security, you would want to detect and respond to the anomalies as rapid as possible. Okay. If you found that somebody has provisioned a 10x large system in a cost constrained environment accidentally, you do not want to run that for 5 days and then being able to have that there was an anomaly in terms of the resourcing, right? You would not want sizable deviations happening on such spends. So you have to build a detect and respond methodology, and a lot of data has to go into driving such decisions of what is normal, what is anomaly, right? So just like security, the AI ML comes in very handy, where you have tools aggregating the data from your tracking, evaluation, prioritizing, estimations, and detecting a change coming from a platform. A platform is giving you signals of where you can optimize. Now, there are built-in technologies within the cloud providers, Azure, AWS, GCP, even Oracle. They have their own ways of delivering such insight to the customer, right? But there are also tools and solutions coming from third parties like us, where we have developed a platform like Shop, right? Where a lot more flexibility in terms of how you configure your rules, how long your data, how long the data is there in the system to actually put a baseline of what is normal, what is not, right? Versus non-configurable tools coming from the cloud providers, for example, right? So there's a lot of flexibility and the power of AI ML, because as you also rightly called out, it's a big data problem as well. So you have to have a lot of data processed in a very aggressive manner to be able to drive some decision making.
So I have one last question. Sorry for my
Please go
questions.
ahead.
Is it for everybody? Is it very important for everyone?
That's a great question. Okay. Can everybody implement it or practice it? Absolutely. Any cloud consumers can. Is it going to benefit everybody? Not really. Okay. There are typical patterns where you can actually shift your energies and focus to some other things, for example, your security, because that's kind of non-negotiable, right? Versus saving some dollars on this. There are patterns, obviously, where FinOps may be an overkill for you. It is debatable, but I understand. But it has to be called out as a trusted advisor. If you have little to no variability in your production environment or spend, right? If you have constant bill for many of the months and you have not changed anything, and you have application code which are static and you are not changing anything around that, it may not be a good idea to invest a lot in terms of the FinOps, be it people, process, or technology side of it, and obviously doing the other priority project for you. Or if you're not spending overall much in the cloud, then you're obviously the ROI will not be huge even if you were to save certain percentage. That if you're spending a tiny amount of your IT budget into the cloud, then it may not be a best fit to take a massive project around FinOps, for example, right? Because buying FinOps tools or services, allocating people, putting their priorities in is some work, and you definitely want to make sure that you're driving value out of it. So the answer is it's not for all, but anybody who has some dynamic billing, which is a very big segment of cloud consumers. If your cloud spend is growing, if you have a budget constraint, you would want to have that you're not one of those contributor to those 55% cloud wastage sort of companies, then obviously it is worthwhile to constantly and deliberately practice. And it is very important to know, Madhvi, that while we called out that if your spend is not much, you might not benefit, it is important that to not confuse with that a pilot and early adoption of the cloud, because most of the cloud projects start small. And if you are at the scale where you're starting small and you see a wastage, then you should actually practice FinOps, because then you are actually setting up a tone for the further adoption of the cloud within your larger ecosystem. We were categorically talking about that if you have migrated everything and you think the cloud spend is not much, then probably it might not be that beneficial.
So, if I understand you correctly, who have varied spends and they know they are on high growth path and they will change plans very frequently, or they'll have to embrace a lot of partners in the ecosystem. Like today, the banking and insurance segment sector, I see a lot of organizations, a lot of fintechs coming in. There are a lot of data handover and then a lot of integrations in place. So how and they're also hiring a lot of FinOps experts. They have some or the other kind of FinOps implementation. How do you think Cloud4C is helping there? How is
Great.
it working as an extended team to them?
It is good that you called out, Madhvi, because we as Cloud4C, I'll just quickly cover who we are. Okay. So we are a multi-cloud application-focused managed services partner working across the globe in about 25 countries, 50 plus locations that we're covering as a customers. We are one of the top partner for Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle, and also a notable partners globally for SAP for the various workloads, including RISE. We're also listed as a visionary in Gartner Magic Quadrant. So to answer your question, well, we always complement, the FinOps initiatives that the customer is running. As I discussed about, one of the challenge was ability to take actions from the engineers, right? So the existing DevOps teams or the teams that have been running the business applications does not necessarily always have this right skills to act on the FinOps insights. And if you don't act on the findings, then you're not achieving the cost savings. So we bring in the people who have the war room experience of running such mitigations and changes. And we the operating model is designed this way that we plug in with the existing expertise that the customer have, because that is important that customer FinOps experts bring in the institutional knowledge, the business side of knowledge of what is important, what is not, for example, right? And we bring in the technical expertise of if you were to optimize your architectures and do it in a slightly different way to result into 30% saving, how would you technically act on that? Be it a modernization initiatives, be it a migration within the cloud, right? To put the right architecture in place. And if I actually take a help of this architecture, a little busy slide, but as you can see, our operating model of how we, our platform and our processes and the COE, the Center of Excellence, be it Azure, AWS, OCI, GCP, security, all these COEs come together to help customer. So we work with the designated FinOps champion within customer and bring in our tooling. And let me go back to one of the slide, which actually speaks on a higher level of how we integrate our tooling into the customer ecosystem and the multi-cloud initiatives. So this is actually going to complement Madhvi of wherever they are, because as we practically see, a customer who is well informed about FinOps is easier to drive the value out of it, because then you are cutting the time of educating the personas, the executives of why it is important, right? If they've already done some hiring, which means they already have a stabilized, at least a central function of a group who's actually working on the setting of the best practices, but they might not have the scale to drive the initiatives, right? And that's where we plug in with that team to bring in our expertise as a service.
So if I understand you correctly, you have a shop, which is self-healing operations platform, which is housing all the leaders in the FinOps space, whether it is Granulate, whether it is Cloud Checker, whether it is the cost optimization tools of Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle, and Intel Cloud Optimizer. And you have expert panels, and they are around 25 plus centers of excellence. They sit and advise, and you will be working with the FinOps experts in the customer side. You'll be working with their executives in the customer side so that you know what business decisions are taken, and is the IT infrastructure, IT landscape in line with that. Am I understanding you correctly? And all of
You're
this is
absolutely right,
continuous.
Madhvi.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So, can you also throw some light as to how Cloud4C helped a lot of customers? How much of value?
Okay.
I know this is everybody is at a different stage, but some people might have realized some sort of impact already when they started this journey. So, how's it like?
Interesting, Madhvi. Let me cover a case study here. We have plenty, but given the time, when I look at the clock, I think we'll have to go a little faster. So I will cover this case study with a leading education providers globally, right? So when we worked with a customer, they had sizable presence of their internal expert who were driving their cloud initiatives, and they were kind of pioneer in terms of adopting the cloud very early in terms of that. But what they were unsure of, they wanted to rationalize overall architecture. So we actually undertook a well-architected review with them. The findings were quite informing to the decision makers at the customer, that they could save about 27 or 28% cost. And that is the number that is coming after the remediations that we have done. And we have seen the impact on the bill. But before that, it was evident after doing the well-architected review, particularly focusing on the cost optimization, that we could have sizable amount of improvement done, not necessarily saving, but improvement in their architecture. So we engaged a multi-COE task force to do the remediations. The assessment was an easy portion. Remediation was a change challenge, right? You had to drive a change with a lot of stakeholders within customer, get a lot of change requests approved by resizing the instances, getting rid of the backups which are actually not useful, and many such changes. And many of the data is kind of private to the customer, right? A lot of such changes actually resulted into the actual documented saving of 28-27% on paper, which is for a customer spending millions on the cloud spend, it is a sizable, budget that they could free up for the further enhancement or the better securities and the initiatives that they wanted to drive. And in return, Cloud4C, became a managed services partner for them, helping them, operating their environment with our expertise plugged into their operating model. Madhvi, is that?
Yeah, yes, of course. So do you have some more stories to share?
We have plenty, Madhvi, but I'm actually looking at, do we have 4 minutes in terms of the allocated time? Because I
I
want
think
to
we
keep,
we do. We do. Please go
okay.
ahead.
Okay, so this is a healthcare, from India, healthcare customer from India. The previous was from Southeast Asia, primarily Singapore and the region. This is, about talking about how a hospital can also leverage, because, everybody is adopting cloud. At least most of the organizations are transforming their processes and by leveraging cloud innovation, right? We use our FinOps practice to optimize and rationalize their landscape. We achieved better monitoring, of how they were monitoring and securing their environment. We also did a database project for them of, modernizing their data landscape and many other things. But what was also a core component of the overall service was our FinOps as a service, where we could reduce their overall budgeted estimate in terms of how much they will spend if they were to put that workload in the cloud in action, which actually result about 40% of lower TCO in 5 years from them. So which is that 40% again was, can be reinvested. Once you are actually getting your workload to the cloud, you want to help your businesses to grow faster, and that's what the Rainbow leadership could do, right? They could reinvest in terms of the project like RPAs and the other.
So where do they start with this? Now that they have understanding that what FinOps can do to their business, where do they start typically? What could
Awareness
be the
is the
first step
first
of
thing. Yeah,
engagement?
identifying the personas. Okay, so the first, the absolute first is assessing whether they need FinOps, right? If they are considering being challenged by the dynamic costs, they are considered about, they're worried about the bill shocks and the rising costs, but they see the value of the cloud, right? So it is the first exercise that they qualify themselves that they definitely needs a service like FinOps. And then obviously identifying some champions within the organization who will drive this initiatives, be it internal or be it with a partner. You need a FinOps, CCO, your center of cloud center of excellence, right? Within how FinOps organization actually laid down that you have to have a central FinOps team within the company, and it can be as big as, a couple of persons or even one individual owning that responsibility, that he will coordinate and collaborate and drive that initiatives. And once you have that, you can engage with, be it, hire everybody internally or work with a partner who will bring in the right people, process and technologies to drive this initiative. And then obviously there are multiple phases where you will build the visibility first, and that's what the partner will actually bring in the right tooling and do the optimization to prove the business case, and then operationalize it for the ongoing users.
Do you have any out of the box package that you can share with the audience here?
Yes, let me go back, Madhvi. Let me go back to the baseline. So this is a, after doing it for several customers, we could come up with a commercial model, which is, in terms of the pricing, in terms of the scope prerequisite, it is making it easier for customers to consume and understand whether they qualify for this. So if you've got a, if you are under these categories of your spend, and if you think that these charges are appropriate, then you have, significant head start in terms of your FinOps initiatives. So what we do as a team is we will be doing the assessment for the customer, and it's a multi-cloud assessment, be it Azure, AWS, GCP, or Oracle. Our team will be doing a multi-dimensional assessment. We'll come back with the spend analysis, the review on a high level review of the security controls as well, of how you're doing the process maturity, the governance maturity of what you have in terms of your residual FinOps expertise. The delivery will have executive report where some decision pointers will be there to drive the optimization and many other benefit. We will also have will need some support from the customer in terms of getting the right access within their ecosystem. So obviously there would be some prerequisite. The engagement model is pretty fast. Within 2 to 3 weeks, we can actually get this done. Obviously, depending on the scale, if it is very large environment, then it can take about 4 weeks to be able to produce a report and work with the customer. So that lays down the foundation of their FinOps maturity. Some customers have done it as a one-off exercise, and I've seen the benefit. Obviously, instant reduction and cultural shift where we can actually lay down some best practices. The other customers who have actually done it as a managed services, where we do the 2 weeks of assessment and 12 months of managed FinOps as a service. You can see the indicated or a rough order of magnitude pricing here on the slide, which actually gives an indicative figure in terms of what they're looking as an investment. But majority of our customers get better return than what they invest actually.
So I did speak to some of the CXOs from the companies that you were referring to. I remember them telling that in the first few weeks of the assessment itself, you were able to basically predict what is the business value that you can deliver through this FinOps model, whether that is TCO reduction or cost optimization, or able to set up their dashboards that they can make a decision making very sharp. I think they've all of these actually signed up for the managed service because for the very fact that there is somebody who's taking care of the monitoring continuously, and they just have to focus on their business, not worry about, am I spending more, am I spending less? Because with you, I think they know that they are spending right and they're spending it for growth. Fantastic, Hitesh. I think this has been excellent discussion. And Bhavya, I want you to run one final poll to take the audience pulse. Like where do they feel where they are? Bhavya, can you run that? Yeah. Audience, please fill in. This helps you and us to form a good first step if you're looking at to understand where you are and to understand what you're planning.
Thanks, Madhvi. I think the only comment that I will conclude with is that I think it's important for nearly all organizations who are actually using cloud for their business initiatives and digital transformation to do some sort of cloud financial management, right? They've got to get the basics of the cloud cost hygiene, for example, preventing the waste, budget alerts and allocations, the charge back and the show back, getting under control, and also leveraging discount related planning, for example, the RIs, the savings plans, and the commit user discount, etc. So these are very foundation principles that should not be ignored by any cloud practitioner.
No, that's nice. So you're anyways continuously adding to the tool set and improving the platform, if I understand you right.
Absolutely. So we as a FinOps practice, we are constantly exploring the possibilities of getting the better value out of the cloud. And we obviously bring it as expertise and the service combined with the tooling. Because just a tool doesn't alone help, right? If you don't have the people and processes to take actions and drive forward, the insights are not going to help a lot, right? So beyond the tooling, we have a comprehensive service where we help our customers.
So you meet them every now and then, and you discuss on this value engineering. How do you extract more value from the investments?
Correct. It's all about driving better value from the dollar spent. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate having me on the call.
Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you for taking your time, and thank you, team, for putting this together. Have a great day ahead.